What's going on, guys? So I'm here to show you another JavaScript framework, and I can actually hear you sighing from here. And before you get all bent out of shape, this is not another React or Vue or anything like that. So Alpine.js is something that a lot of people have actually recommended to me and asked me to do a video on. And I finally got around to it. I was using Laravel with Blade templating, and I just needed to add some very simple dynamic elements to the page. And I saw some examples with Alpine.js, and I liked what I saw. So I ended up using it, and it's definitely something that I think is worth making a video on. I think a lot of you guys are going to find this useful. It's not something like React or Angular where you base your entire application around it. To me, it's more like jQuery. It's more like something you bring in and then you use what you want from it. And you can use it with just an HTML, CSS website. You can use it with something like Laravel and Blade, which is where I started using it, Django and Django templates or whatever, anything like that. And you don't even have to enter a JavaScript file. It's all from the HTML. It's all using attributes and properties. So the way you use it is just include a script tag, and then you can basically define what's called a component. So this div right here has an xData attribute. You don't even have to have anything after that. That just declares it as a component, and then you can also add state to it. So in this case, we have open false. And then you can add events where you can manipulate that state, and there's 15 different attributes to do all kinds of stuff. You also have different properties and methods. So we're going to basically create a sandbox and just look at all of this stuff, and I'm going to show you exactly how everything works. And then, you can obviously take what you want from it, and I think that a lot of you guys are going to find it useful. All right, so we're going to create a sandbox or a playground where we can look at all the different attributes and all the different properties and stuff that Alpine gives us. So I do have just a single index HTML file here with just a boilerplate with an H1, and I'm running it with Live Server, which is a VS Code extension. So the first thing we need to do is add the CDN. All right, so if we go to alpine.js.dev, I'm just going to copy this script tag right here, and I'm just going to paste that in right above the title. It has these double slashes, but I'm just going to add HTTPS because I was having some issues with it earlier. And then I'm also going to use Tailwind just so this doesn't look horrible. So I'm going to go to tailwindcss.com, get started, and then there's the play CDN that we can use. So I'll just grab that real quick, and let's paste that in here as well. Actually, I'm going to put that under the Alpine. Okay, so go ahead and save that and close those two up, and you can see it already looks different because we are using Tailwind, so it takes away all the styling, changes the font, etc. All right, and I will be typing in some Tailwind classes, but you don't really have to pay attention to that part. So let's go ahead and close this up because we don't need to work in any JavaScript files. Everything is done within attributes within our HTML, which is really cool. So I'm going to get rid of this H1 here, and I do have just a container that I'm going to paste in and an H1. Okay, so we're going to go under this H1 and let's create an Alpine component. So we do that by just creating a div, and then we can add an attribute in here of x-data. And just doing this will declare it as a component. And if we want to add some state to this or some data, then we can just set it here. So just like the documentation, I'm just going to set an open value of false. Okay, now this data, whatever we put in here, is only going to be accessible within this particular component. If I create a div down here, we're not going to have access to that data. Now, let's say we only want to show something if open is true. So in that case, we would use the x-show attribute. So in this div, I'm going to say x-show equals, and let's set that to open. So basically, if open is set to true, then whatever we put in here will show. And I'm just going to put, let's do a paragraph, and I'm just going to give it some Tailwind classes. We'll do gray 200. Let's do padding for margin on the y-axis 6 and rounded. Okay, so we have a paragraph, and then I'll just put some dummy data in here. So I'm going to save that, and it no longer shows. And if I were to put open now to true, then it will show. But I just want to show you real quick, if I put this back to false and I reload, sometimes you're going to see a little flicker. So to get rid of that, we could go on to where we have the X show, and we could do an inline style. So just set this to display none. So we could do that. Now we don't see the flicker anymore. But there is actually a solution that Alpine offers, and that's to use x-cloak. So we do have to just add a tiny bit of CSS, so I'll just put it right up here. And in brackets, we can say x-cloak, and then just simply set the display to none. And then wherever we want to use this, we could just go down here onto this div and just add x-cloak like that. And now we shouldn't see any flicker. Okay, and if I set this back to true, then we should see it. All right, but I want it set to false, and now what I want to do is have a button to toggle that, that X show div. So I'm going to put it above, and let's create a button. I'm just going to give it a few classes here. We'll do bg-slate 700. Let's do text-white, and let's say px-4, py-2, and we'll say rounded XL. All right, and then in here we'll say toggle. Save that. Okay, so now we have a button, and what we can do is on this button we can use the X on attribute. So this will excuse me, this will allow us to listen for browser events, and we can put a colon and then whatever we want to listen for, which in this case is a click, and we can set it to do what we want. So I'm just going to set it to open equals true. Okay, so when we click this, open will get set from false to true. So I'll click it, and now we can see the text. Now I can't toggle it because I just simply set it to true. So if I want it to toggle, I can just say set it to the opposite of what it is. So now if I come over here, I can just toggle it. All right, and this is something you might want to just add to a very simple website, but you don't want to use a framework, you don't want to use jQuery, you don't want to add a custom JavaScript file. So this is, I think it's a really nice solution, especially if you're working with like Laravel templates or something like that. All right, so moving on, next we're going to look at xtext, which will set the text content of an element. So if you want to set, use some data, for instance, let's add something else to this. I'll just say name, and we'll set that to a string of Brad. Okay, so if I want to just output that somewhere, let's go under this div of open, and I'm just going to do a class here of my4 just to add some space, and let's say the value of name is, and then we'll have a span, and I'm just going to use a class of font bold, and I'm not going to put anything within the span, but what I'm going to do is use the xtext attribute, and I want to get the value of name. Okay, so let's save that, and now we see the value of name is Brad. So if you want to output any values in your state, you can do it with this xtext. Okay, and of course I can still toggle this as well. So we have some dynamic functionality going on without having to even leave the HTML file. In fact, this is what HTML would look like if it were a programming language. We even have conditionals, we have if statements, we have loops, and I'm going to go over all that stuff. Now I think we should put just a little bit of some comments in here. So I'm just going to say this is for xtext, and this is x-data, which is an Alpine component. Then we have x on, x on. Then we have our x show. Oh, and another thing we can do is if we use x show, we can also add to this x transition, and it will make it a little smoother. So now if I toggle it, you'll see it has a little transition on it rather than just having it just, click right in. So let's see the difference. See how that just clicks right in? So if I add X transition, it actually kind of scales up a little bit. All right, now the next one I want to look at is X effect, which is pretty cool. It's kind of like use effect in React. It will basically execute a script or whatever we want to happen whenever the dependencies change, okay, or whenever a property changes. So let's go under where we did the X text. Let's say this is X effect, and what we'll do is have a div here, and we're not going to put anything within the div, but we're going to add an X effect attribute, and we're going to set it to, let's just do a console.log of open, okay, because open is a piece of our state. And then I'm going to open up the console here. You'll see it says false right away because that's what it starts as. Click toggle. Now we get true. Okay, so false, true. So it's just going to watch our component, and when the state changes, it'll go ahead and do whatever we tell it to. If we wanted to do an alert, we could do that as well. So now you see it's just going to set an alert. If we wanted to run a function for our JavaScript, we could also do that. So now I want to look at xbind, which will allow us to dynamically set HTML attributes on an element. So let's say for this button, when it's open, maybe we want to have a different color than if it's closed. So we can bind to the class attribute. So I'm going to go right here, and even though we already have some, static classes here, that's fine. We can still do it this way. So I'm going to say xbind onto the class, and we're going to say if it's not open, or let's say if it is open, then, because we can just use a ternary in here, we want to add the class. So in quotes here, we're going to say bg dash, and let's do blue 800, and then else, then nothing. Okay, or we could take this. Yeah, let's do that. We'll take that color and put that in here like that. All right, so we'll save, and if I click toggle, now you'll see if I click toggle, the color changes to blue. All right, and it's any attribute. It doesn't have to be just class. Now you can also just remove xbind, and we can do it like that. That will do the same thing. So kind of like Vue.js. And I'm just going to add to the comment here, let's say xond and xbind. All right, so now we're going to look at xmodel, which will allow us to bind a value to an input. So actually, I'm going to add to my state up here. Let's just clean this up a little bit. We'll just put these on different lines. Hopefully Prettier lets me do that. And I'm just going to add another value here of search and just set that to an empty string. Okay, and then let's come down to the bottom here. We'll go under the X effect, and let's say X model, and we want an input here. I'm just going to give it a couple classes. Let's do border and padding 2. Let's do width dash full, and margin bottom 2 and margin top 6. Okay, so we have an input. Let's add a placeholder to it. So we'll say placeholder search for something. So now we have our input, and what I'm going to do here is add an xmodel attribute and set it to that search value in our state. Okay, and by doing that, if I come back up here and I add something in here like 1, 2, 3, that's going to show in here. And this should be very familiar if you have used React, or if you've used like Angular. It's similar to ng model. So if we want to use this somewhere, like let's go under the input and we'll have a paragraph, and let's do a span. We'll just say font bold, and in here we'll say searching for : and then under that we'll have a span, and we want to use x text, and we'll set that to search. So now whatever I type in here is going to show up down here. So very, very cool. And we're doing all this without even having to leave the HTML file. Now I want to look at xif, which is basically just an if statement. So let's go under, let's see. Yeah, we want to go under this paragraph here, and let's put a comment. We'll say this is xif, and I'm just going to basically do the same thing that xshow does. In fact, we'll make it a template, and let's say template x-if, and just set that to open. So basically this template is only going to show if open is true. And here we'll just say template a template that is based on a condition, and I'm just going to give a couple classes to this. So let's say bg-gray-50 and padding and margin top 8. All right, so now if I click toggle, now we're only going to see this down here if if open is true, right? If I close it, then we no longer see it. And you could put any condition you want in here. So another thing we can do is loops with the x4 attribute. So I'm actually going to come back up to my state, and I'm going to add on to this, let's say posts, and let's set that to an array, and we'll just have a title. So we'll say title post 1, and let's copy that down a few times. So post 1, post 2, and obviously you can have more data than this, 3 and 4. Okay, so now what I want to do is loop through those posts. So under this x-if, let's say x-4, and I'm just going to add an h3 here. Let's say text 2xl and margin top 6, margin bottom 3, and font bold, and we'll say posts. Okay, and then underneath that, let's do a template. All right, and let's see, we'll get rid of that for a second. And then in the template, this is where we're going to use the x4, and we simply say for post in posts. And this can be anything you want. This post pertains to the post in our state. And then I just want to output a div, and we're going to put in here x-text and set that to, let's say, post.title. Save that, and now it's going to loop through all the posts in our state and output it. Now let's say I want to have a button where I click it and it adds a post. All right, I mean, usually you would have a form to do this, but just to keep it simple, let's go underneath the template, and I'm just going to have a button here, and let's make it bg-blue-800 and text white px4 py2 rounded-lg and margin top 4. Okay, so we have our button, and let's say add post. So, I mean, if you guys want to pause the video and try this on your own to see if you know exactly what to do based on, what we've already done, then you can do that. So for the button, we're going to have an X on, and I also want to mention this, instead of doing X on click, like Vue.js, we can just go ahead and do @click. So let's say @click, and then we're going to set that to posts.push. And we can set this to a JavaScript function as well if you want to actually, create a script tag or have a separate JavaScript file. But I'm just going to add on, let's say title, and we'll say new post. So now if we come down here and I click add post, we're going to be able to just keep adding new posts. Obviously, it's not going to stick because we're not persisting the data, but you can see that we have this front-end functionality. Now we can also access elements directly using an attribute called xref in combination with something called refs, which is a magic property. So let's go under the button here, and we'll say x-ref, and let's do a div. We won't put anything in it right now, and let's do xref and set that to text. And you could set this to anything. And then we'll have a button. Let's do bg-black, text-white, and p2, and rounded LG. Okay, and I don't know, we'll just say click. You know what, let's actually wrap this in a div. I just want to move it down a little bit. So we'll say MT, or we'll do my-6, and let's move this. We'll move this into there. All right, so let's say when I click this button, excuse me, I want to directly reference this div. And since we have this xref, we can do that. So we'll say @click equals, and I mean, we could really do anything we want. Let's say we want to add some text to it, so we could grab it with refs. Whoops, let me click in here. We grab it with money sign refs. So this is what's called a magic property, and that just basically grabs the element. So if we want to, or I should say refs.text or whatever it is that we put in here, and then let's say I want to do inner, we'll say inner text or whatever, inner HTML, and we could set that to, let's say, hello world. So now if I go ahead and I click this, now it's going to get filled with hello world. Or maybe I have hello world in here, and I want to remove that when the button's clicked. So we could say text dot and then just call remove. And now if I click, it'll go ahead and remove. So, I mean, whatever you want to do with this element, and it could be any, it doesn't have to be a div, it could be an input, whatever, and then you can directly grab that somewhere else using the magic property refs and whatever you put in this value. Now, another thing we can do is use the x-HTML attribute, which will set the inner HTML of an element. But what's cool is it can be from somewhere else. So what I'm going to do is let's go under this div here, the my6, let's say x-HTML, and I'm actually going to use Axios from within this file here to fetch HTML from somewhere else. It'll just be another file on, in my folder, but it could be anywhere at all. So let's get the Axios CDN. So right here from CDN.js, I'm just going to copy the script tag, and then we'll just put that up top here in the head. Okay, so we're including Axios to be able to use it, and then what I'm going to do is create another HTML file. We'll call this partial.html. And in here, let's just put in h1. We'll give it a text-2xl, and we'll say this is from another file, or this is HTML from another file. And then right here, what we can do is have let's close that up. We can have a div, and we're not going to actually put anything in the div. I mean, whatever we put in it is going to be replaced. And then we can do x-HTML, and let's set that to, in some parentheses here, we're going to await axios.get, and we want to do /partial.html, and with Axios, it's going to come in data property. So we'll do that, and let's save, and now you can see this is HTML from another file. And again, this could be on some other server somewhere else as long as it's accessible. So let's see, we can also reference the current DOM element with the L property. So money sign EL. So we'll do that. Let's go under this, and let's say money sign EL. And we'll just use a button. So let's say button, let's do margin top 4, padding -4, and border, and we'll just say replace text, and then on click, so you can either do @click or we can do x-on click like that. And I just want to replace the text. So to get the current element, I simply use money sign EL. So we can take that, and then we can set the inner HTML to, let's say, hello world. Okay, so we'll save that, and if I click replace text, it just goes to hello world. Okay, and you can do anything with it. The point of it is just to show you that you can access the current element with this, kind of like how you can access other elements with the refs property. These are both called magic properties. Now we also have a property called watch, which will watch a particular component property. So for instance, if we let's go under this button here, and let's create a div. And one other attribute I didn't show you is x-init, which is it'll just fire off some JavaScript when it's initialized. So let's say -init and set that. So for instance, I could just say console log 1, And if I come over here, you'll see that there's a 1 because this div was initialized. But what I want to do is watch something. So within here, instead of doing a console log, let's say we want to watch our posts. So we're going to use money sign watch, and we want to watch posts. So that's just the part of our state. And then we have a value, and then we can use an arrow here and do what we want with it. So we'll just console log here, value. All right, so now if I come down here to posts and I click add posts, it's just going to show the entire object here. Actually, I can't, yeah, right here. So it has all of them 1 through 4, including the new post. If I click it again, that's going to fire off again and console log it. So if we look at the data here, there's the second post. All right, so if you want to watch something in your state or in your data, you can do that with watch along with the x-init attribute. Another one we have is dispatch, which is a shortcut for dispatching browser events. So let me show you what I mean. Let me just, here I'm going to say x-init and watch. All right, so let's come down here, and this is going to be dispatch. And let's just close this up over here. So again, this is a shortcut for dispatching browser events. So maybe we have a div here, and inside we'll have a button. Let's say border. Actually, no, let's do BG dash. We'll say green dash 700 text white and padding 4 and rounded LG. And in here, let's just say notify. Let's say we want to dispatch an event called notify. Okay, that's a little too much padding. Let's do P2 and MT4. I just want this to look decent. All right, now the way that we dispatch is just adding a click event. So let's say at click or x on click. And we're going to set that to money sign dispatch, and then whatever it is we want to dispatch. Let's say in this case, we'll call it notify. So then on this div here, I could say at notify and set that to whatever we want to do. Let's just say alert, and we'll say you have been notified. Notified. All right, so we'll save that, and now if I click this, that will dispatch this, which is up here. It gets called and it alerts us. Now, you're probably going to be working with some kind of JavaScript file outside of this. Well, I shouldn't say probably, if it's a larger application. And you might want to get a piece of data from your state here. So let's go ahead and create down here some script tags. And I'm going to create a function. Let's call it get latest post. All right, and we'll pass in here data. And then we'll just do a console.log. And we want to get the latest post, so we could do data. Actually, you know what? Let's, instead of passing in all the data, let's just get the posts. Yeah, we'll say posts. And then we should be able to say post.slice -1 dot and then pop. That should give us the latest post in an array, or the latest item in an array. So how do we actually do this? How do we call this and pass this in? Well, we can do that with a magic property called data. So I'm going to go under where we did the dispatch, and let's say this is going to be data, and we'll do a button. Let's do BG orange 800 and text dash white, margin top 6, padding 2, and rounded, say rounded LG. And then let's say get latest post. Okay, so we'll save that, and we'll add a click event here. Let's say at click, and we're going to set that to get latest post, and then we need to pass the posts in. We can do that with money sign data, so that gives us all of our data, but I just want to pass in the posts. All right, so now let's come down here and open up our console. Let's click that button, and there you can see we get post 4. Okay, if I add another post and click this again, now we get the new post. All right, so I mean, if you're working with a bigger application and you have JavaScript outside of just what you're doing within Alpine, but you need access to that data, that's how you can do it. All right, and you can write any JavaScript. Like let's say we want to have a footer. Now I'm outside of my main component right now, but I could make this a component simply by doing x data, and I don't even have to add any any data to it for it to be a component, and then I can still use my attributes in here. Like for instance, we'll have a paragraph and we'll say copy, let's say copyright, copy, and then we'll do span, and we'll do x-text, and we can put any JavaScript expression we want in here. Like let's say new date. We'll say new date, and then we'll do get, say get full year, like that, and then save, and you'll see I get copyright 2022. And let me just add classes on here. We'll say text dash center, and let's do MT10 just to push that down. Okay, now I won't have access to the other pieces of data. Like if I do, let's say x-text, and I set that to name, we're not going to get that because we're not in that component. Okay, so now what I want to show you is, what do I want to do next? I think we should look at stores next, which is pretty cool. It's a way to store data on the client side. So I think what we'll do is create a different file for this. So let's create another file called stores.html. And let's just create a boilerplate here. We'll just say Alpine.js stores. And we do need to include the CDNs for Tailwind and Alpine. So let's just grab that. These two here. Okay, paste those in. And the way that this works is it really reminds me of Vue.js, and I'm sure that some of you will agree. But we're going to set a script tag down here, and then we're going to do document.add event listener. And the event that we're listening for is called Alpine, and then : init. Okay, so when Alpine is initialized, then we're going to call this function, and then we can use the Alpine object, which has a store method, and in here we're going to pass in just the name of our store, or I guess the name of our store, which I'm going to call dark mode. Okay, so basically I want to store value for dark mode, and it'll change the way that it looks based on that. So that's that, and then we have an object where we can have data and methods, much like in Vue.js. So we'll have a piece of data called on, which we'll set to false by default. Then make sure you put a comma there, and then we can have methods as well, such as toggle. So we'll say toggle, and we can use this just like with Vue.js. We'll say this dot on is equal to whatever this dot on is not. So we'll be able to toggle it. Okay. Now, right now we don't even have the file open in the browser. Let's just put a hello up here, and then I'm going to open this file with live server. So right now we just see hello, but we have this all set. So we have a store called dark mode, we have this data value, and we have a method to toggle that value. So let's go ahead and use that up here. I'm going to have a div, let's say container, we'll do mx-auto, let's say max width, we'll just do max width small, and let's do margin top 6, and we'll do a background of gray. Let's do gray 50, and some padding. And then I'm just going to put some dummy text in here. We'll do lorem 40. All right. Now I want to make this a component, so I'm just going to say x data, and I don't have to set any data here. What I want to do is bind to the class attribute and have specific classes based on this particular value in our store. So let's do, we can do xbind, or we can just do colon and then the attribute we want, which is class. And let's say money sign store dot dark mode. So that's the name of our store, and then dot the value that we want to look at, which is called on. And I'm going to use the null coalescing operator, which is double ampersand. So it's just basically saying, if this is true, then do whatever. You could also use a ternary if you want. But if that's true, then I want to have the class of BG, actually let's do BG gray -800 and text -white if dark mode is on. So if we save that, we're not going to see any difference because dark mode is set to false, but let's set that to true and save, and now there we go. Now we have dark mode enabled. So I'm going to turn it back off, and now let's create a button to toggle that. So inside of our component, let's put a button. Let's do a couple classes here. I'm just going to say display block. Let's say margin top -4. We'll do text extra small, BG-gray 200, and PX-4 and PY-2. And let's say toggle dark mode and save. All right, so now we have our button. And to make this function, let's go ahead and add our click. Okay, so what we want to do is take our store object and just call dark mode, and then call the method of toggle. Save that, click it. There we go. We can toggle it. Now, if we want to change, you probably want to change this as well, because the text is now white. So what we could do is add on to this. We could bind to the class here, and let's say if the store dot dark mode dot on, then let's do BG-gray -700. So now if I click go to dark mode, it flickers like that just because of live server, so don't worry about that. But now we're all set, and we can just toggle dark mode. So pretty cool. And again, I think it's very powerful, but it's very simple as well. And you can get into this stuff as well as just have simple attributes where you just want to click a button and maybe have something show somewhere else, or a simple little slider or whatever it is. But that's pretty much it. That's basically everything. Oh, one more thing I wanted to show you was plugins. So let's see, if we go to Alpine.js, I'm just going to search for Alpine plugins. And let's see, there's a particular plugin I wanted to show you, which was the mask plugin. So let me just search for that. Plugin mask. Yeah, so right here. And this will allow you to automatically format a text input field as a user types. This is useful for many different types of inputs like phone numbers, credit cards, dates, etc. So what we need to do to install it is just include the CDN, which is going to be both of these right here. Actually, no, just this one, Alpine plugins, right? Yeah, that includes mask. You can also use NPM if you want, but I'm just going to grab that. And then let's go back to our index, and I'm going to paste this. And it has to be, like it says, before Alpine's core JS file. So we're going to go up above that and include that. And I'm pretty sure that's all we need. Or do we need? Yeah, that should be fine. And now to use this, I'm basically just going to copy this. But let's grab that. And basically what it's going to allow us to do is have to type in the date in this certain way. You know, I can't type in letters or symbols, and if I type in numbers, it has to be like that. So I think that that's pretty useful. You know, simple little things like that are really useful. So let's come down here. Let's go, I'm going to go above the footer, and I guess it doesn't really matter if we're in a component or not, but I'm going to stay within this component. So let's, well, it doesn't matter if we're in a component. It doesn't matter if we're in this particular component. So yeah, I think that should do it. I'm just going to surround it with a div though with mt6, and then let's just add, we'll say h3 text dash 2xl, enter a date. Yeah, and then we'll bring this up here. So let's see what that gives us. Why is that not showing? Is this not working? There we go. All right, so enter a date. Let's format this a little better though. We don't have to, but this just bothers me. So let's do MB, we'll say MB2, just to push that down a little bit. And then on the input, let's add class border and width dash full, and a little bit of padding. All right, so now if I click in here and I type, I can't type any letters, that doesn't work. If I put in numbers, I have to format it as a date. All right, so I have to do it like that. And I think, again, little things like this are really useful when you're building websites and interfaces. All right, so that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, I know people hear the word JavaScript framework and they cringe just because there's been so many, but I think this is different. It's so lightweight, it's so easy to use, and to me, it's more like something like jQuery where you bring it in and you use certain parts of it rather than having it dictate the way you do everything. And you can use it with Laravel, with Django, with just a regular static website, anything you want. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon.